Hi, in this video I'm going to demonstrate for you the extremely important aspects that you need to consider every time you want to render an animated sequence in Maya. The first one is you want to make sure that your scene is set up. You want to set up your Maya project properly. So here are my folders, and the images subfolder is where the images are going to go to. If you do not set up your Maya project, your images could be lost, could be gone, could vanish, or could be somewhere that you would have to hunt down eventually, and who knows what's going to be the result. So instead, you just want to make sure you set up your Maya project properly. So you go to File, and then you can go into Set Project, and then in here you would type in the directory. And if you want more information about setting up your project, I'll add a link for my other video for setting the project. Now that your Maya scene is set up and you have this sort of animation, it's kind of hysterical, right? So this is one of the common things that you will have, and unfortunately by default they keep it this way, which is very, very useless. You go right mouse button on the timeline, anywhere here on the timeline, you play back speed to the third option, play every frame, max real time. This way it's going to play properly. Now you know that your animation is good. It's very important to double check that your animation is good. You can even play blast it and make sure that the play blast looks good. And if you need more information about play blast, I will also add a link for my play blast video, in which I cover a lot of interesting details that you may want to learn about. Okay. Now with that out of the way, so step 1 is setting up your Maya project. Step 2 is testing out a play blast to make sure that before you render your scene, it looks good in play blast. You do not want to render it and only later, oops, it's kind of too fast. The third aspect you need to consider is to go into the render settings. Okay, this step is extremely important. Now, notice before I go into the settings here, I am on camera 1 or 2 or 3, whichever that works for me. In this case, I am on camera 1. So I know that camera 1 is the one that I need. Now with that in mind, let's discuss the render settings. You're gonna go into the Common tab. The first thing that you wanna change is the name. So for instance, in this case, chess sequence. Next, I'm going to change the format into whatever format that works for me. If I'm using AOVs, render passes, then in that case EXR is the ideal. If you want to do something light and simple, you can go with JPEG or PNG. Now, so I'll leave that up to you, okay? I'll just go with JPEG for now. The next aspect you need to consider is this one here. This is evil if you leave it, because it's going to just really ruin your anticipation for this project. So what you need to do is to make sure it's not single frame. You do have a sequence, but by default it's gonna render out a single frame. So instead you wanna do name underscore number and then dot extension. The emphasis is on dot extension in order for the sequence to be compositable in any different software. Now, you want to choose the time range. So in this case here, I'm ending at frame 60. So I'm going to type here the end frame 60. Enter. And now it's going to render from frame 1 to frame 60. Let's say, for instance, you dropped, the term is dropping frames, which means during the rendering, maybe you get a glitch, or maybe you get a render Arnold rendering license error. Suddenly it just watermarks, let's say, from 34 to 41. Then in that case, you can go here to 34 tab to 41, for instance. And you run this separately after you finish the first sequence. And in this case, it would only render these frames. Just to elaborate more about how we run these numbers. Okay. So back here to the default that I want to go with. Next, you scroll down. This is another evil thing that if you leave it by default, you will not be happy. So you want to make sure you render camera 1. Okay. Now, If you want, you can go here and scroll down all the way down, and you can add another renderable camera. So if you want to do like a cinematic sequence and you have multiple cameras, you can also add another camera, but I wouldn't recommend this for beginners. Okay, I'll take this out. Now, when it comes to resolution, it's also very important to set it up. If you are test rendering your scene, you don't really know what it looks like, and you want to have a good idea about what it looks like before you really commit to the full rendering, meaning the play blast would show you the animation, right? But if you want to have an idea about what the render looks like, what the lighting looks like, and you just kind of want to have like 10-20 frames just to kind of test the feeling of it, you can just go with something really ridiculously low resolution just to have an idea, and then later on you can commit to the full HD. Okay, so that's all you need from here. So that is step number 3. Step number 4 is to go into the rendering. You go into render and then batch render. So when it comes to batch render, once you click on batch render, it's gonna run a script and it's gonna show you that it is getting ready to render, and then it's gonna show you the percentage of the rendering, which is nice because it assures you that things are going well. Something to keep in mind, this is something that a lot of people don't know, and you should definitely keep in mind. Unlike the typical rendering that we get from like render sequence, like, hey, run this render for me, and it's gonna take, you know, whatever time, and you will feel that the computer is really suffering with it. So unlike this, when it comes to batch rendering, you go into the batch render and you start the process. After you start the batch render, you can actually work on a different Maya scene. You can work on different software, different projects, so you could still be productive during that time. Something that you should always keep in mind. So if you have multiple projects together, once you're done with this, you can render it out and start on something else in the meantime. Alright, I hope you find this video helpful.